already know who it is, man. It's your boy, Sports God TV, where we talk sports like religion. If you haven't already, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button, man. Share the content, jump in the comments. Let's get it cracking. And today is a special episode because it's the first time I've ever went live. And I'm going live with my big brother, Enterprises. What's up with your big Brody?
Ain't a whole lot, man. Just chilling, man. Looking at and seeing what's happening in the future in that old boxing ring. You know what I mean?
Yes, sir. The famous squared circle, man. Squared circle. And speaking of boxing, right? Obviously we just had a mega fight between a former unified welterweight champion, Errol the Truth Spence Jr., and WBO, well, now undisputed welterweight champion Terrence Bud Crawford. And obviously, it was a one-sided affair, considering that it was a 50-50 split between the public and the boxing experts. So, with that being said, Terrence Crawford came out and said that he's pondering retirement. What are your thoughts about Bud Crawford after this magnificent performance, considering that he's turning 36 in September? His thought process of him thinking and pondering retirement.
Well, it's a double-edged sword because when you look at a lot of our former champions, people like Evander Holyfield, when you look at people like Tommy Hearns,
yes, sir,
you see the effects of what can happen when you take enough hits upside the head. And so anytime a fighter who's accomplished what Bud Crawford has accomplished, outside of the financial aspect, he doesn't have anything else to do. So, I mean, don't get me wrong, he can add to his legacy, but it's already written, right? And so you have to weigh what your health, the benefits of your health, if you do retire at this age. He's been in the ring for a while now. He turns 36 next month. And sometimes we tend to wait too long to retire. So if he retires on top of the game, that's a good thing to do.
Most definitely. Now, he has openly spoke about wanting to challenge Jermell Charlo at 154 for undisputed. There is the WBO has stripped Jermell Charlo for his WBO title because he is due to fight Canelo Alvarez in September, which means that the mandatory for that particular belt was Tim Tszyu. So if the rematch is not exercised between Errol Spence Jr. and Terrence Bud Crawford, which Errol has clearly stated that he wants the rematch, and if you watch the epilogue, that Showtime recently released, they showed some unseen footage from behind the scenes after the loss of Errol, in there with his family, with his mother and his children, and all his father and everybody like that. And he was like, man, he peed off. He was just like, he got me, and he was just like, we're gonna have to run that back. And he asked his child, we're gonna run that back. And then gave his son a high five or whatever the case may be. So Earl is a competitor. So it seems like that fight, and Terrence didn't shoot that down, no matter how one-sided that fight was. But as far as payday goes, between either Charlo or Earl, there's no other really, really big payday unless you're talking Canelo, which Bud has clearly said that 168 is too big for him to go up to.
Yeah, I see. Well, he recognizes that, and that's a good thing. I think, Errol Spence, I seen an interview with Mayweather, and he thinks that Spence should be fighting at 160 or 168. which would probably be a better weight for him in terms of him not having to lose a lot of weight to make weight, which can, in effect, drain your energy and stuff like that. But just back on what I said a little while ago, I mean, I think about people like Wilfred Benitez. I mean, I think about people like James Toney. These guys, man, their brain, you know that CTE and brain damage is there just by the way they communicate. And like Wilfred Benitez, I mean, he can't even, I mean, the condition that I seen him in, I don't even know if he's still living on that, but the condition that I seen him in, it's just, man, it's a horrific situation. And so Earl Spence, he took a beating. And I know that we've seen multiple people take beatings, but it was a beating to me over a sustained period of time. A lot of headshots. He's been in accidents. And so I think he even though he's the younger fighter, if anybody is considering retirement, well, anytime you're a boxer, considering retirement is understandable. But Earl should definitely, more than Bud at this moment, even though he's the younger fighter, should be considering retirement.
It's a double. It's a two-way street for me on this topic right here when we talking Earl Spence retiring versus Bud Crawford retiring. Now Bud is what 40-0 with 31 knockouts, no defeats, no draws, but his resume. Earl is obviously the biggest on his resume as far as opponent goes. Yeah. So, like we said earlier, as far as adding to his legacy, I think I heard him say that he got about 3 or 4 more fights, but they obviously got to be big money fights. Obviously, Earl is another big money fight. I don't care what the public says about that fight. If they rematch, they will buy that fight because everybody wants to see Earl Spence Jr. bounce back. See, could he put on a better performance? When you consider the weight drain, which they both openly said they struggled with, when you consider great champions taking their first L before, but then bouncing back to get a win, and against a quality opponent. And so, with that being said, one thing that his mother alluded to, meaning Earl Spence's mom alluded to in the locker room was, remember what I told you back in 2012 when you lost back in the Olympics? And I don't think he lost from that moment all the way up until a couple weeks ago against Terrence. So, and for Bud, yes, he says he's been in rings fighting since he's been 7 years old, but he hasn't really taken a substantial amount of punishment in my eyes. Mm-hmm. So it seems like he still has some longevity, but he always said that he will retire from boxing and won't let boxing retire him.
Okay. You know, the thing is that when I look at Earl Spence and I look at Bud Crawford, you know, speaking on retirement, but we was just speaking on that, but kind of going to the side a little bit. You mentioned about who Earl has fought versus who Bud has fought. And I would say overall he has maybe fought the bigger names.
Okay.
But when you look at people as far as undefeated champions that he's beat, most people that Earl fought, big names that he fought, they had already took or suffered defeat.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
A lot of fighters and even champions that Bud fought, they hadn't tasted defeat before they fought Bud.
Absolutely. I agree.
So that's the thing with when we compare resumes with both fighters, is that you have one fighter that's given undefeated champions their first taste of defeat, where I didn't see Earl really do that.
Right.
And so you can say, if you're just going by name, that Earl has the better resume, but Bud has been in more wars than Earl, I think, which in turn makes him a better fighter. It's like you being a team playing in the SEC in football.
College football, correct.
Exactly, versus somebody playing in another far lesser conference. And even though you are, even, so my point I want to make out of that, not to go into a long speech, is that he's been in wars, he's been in fights, man. He's been in the SEC.
Correct.
And so by him being in the SEC, he knows how to handle adversity. He knows how to pivot a lot of things what he's doing on the fly, because he's been in some wars, man. I've looked at a lot of his fights before I started really focusing on how good he is. I looked at a lot of those fights that I didn't see live.
Right.
And so I seen how he faced a lot of adversity and overcame it. I never seen really Earl have to face adversity like that.
Okay.
That I can recall. And so I think that made Bud a better fighter all around. And I think that made Bud be able to enter this moment that he took last Saturday or the Saturday before last. He entered it in a different mind frame than Earl did.
Okay. Yeah, openly, I was riding with Earl Spence, and I also said that I will continue to ride with Earl Spence despite him taking his loss. I don't believe in kicking the man down while he's down, But I've also expressed the skill level and noticed that Terrence Bud Crawford is also the truth. I think a Ugas, a Thurman. Well, I can't compare Thurman, but a Ugas and maybe a Garcia, those fighters that Terrence haven't fought. I think he washes them as well, like Earl did. But in my eyes, in my book, I would like to see a rematch only because I'm a guy that like adversity. I like a guy to be able to go through adversity, see how he responds from that adversity. If all goes well when it comes to health, he gets cleared for whatever measures he needs to take to make sure he is good physically or mentally, then I would love to see another fight. I don't know how much it changes. If Earl throws a few kinks in his armor when it comes to not being maybe so straightforward and flat-footed, so to speak, or will Terrence just put on another display? Like the perfect song was what he came out to with Eminem. That was the perfect moment, and it seemed like he seized that moment perfectly, right?
Did he? Did he? I mean, that song perfectly fit what he did. He made that song a reality when he put on the performance that he put on. I just don't see Earl in 4 months being able to change his stripes. I
can't see it.
I had it as a 50-50 fight. Like I said before, I know that you said that I was kind of like picking Bud.
Bud, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was leaning towards Bud, but I know that Earl was the bigger fighter. So, and I know that Bud, when you hit him good, he just gonna start going wild.
Yeah.
In his latest fights, and I figured that if Earl's gonna win, it's gonna be because of a moment like that where Bud just starts swinging and open himself up to more and more punches, and Earl would get him like that. But Bud didn't do that.
Absolutely.
He didn't do that. He didn't do that. He was more calculated with his defense, or more calculating with his defense, and more thoughtful about his offense. And that's what the difference was. If I knew that he would be mindful of his defense like that. I wouldn't have gave Earl a chance because I think that Bud is the better fighter. I think that he's just the better fighter. And he's proven that he can come just think, Earl, once he established himself as Earl Spence, was the favorite in all his fights.
Correct.
Bud wasn't the favorite in all his fights.
Correct.
You know what I'm saying? So when you can beat the odds, you are used to coming in and beating the odds. And so now let's see how Earl responds if they fight again, because he's definitely, even though Bud was favored in this fight, we know that was just in Vegas for the most part. Most people thought that Earl was going to win the fight. And so in this fight, most people going to be thinking that Bud is going to win the fight. So let's see how Earl is able to respond to that. But I just don't see him changing this, being able to change his stripes. He may make it a better fight than, I mean, you can't make it any worse than this was. So
yeah, well, it was not a good.
You know, I would expect a better fight, but I just hope he hasn't been damaged enough where as though he done.
Right. And speaking of that fight, man, as far as how lopsided that it ended up being, a lot of people got emotional about that fight, and one being Baltimore native superstar boxer Gervonta Tank Davis yelled out a few comments about Terrence Bud Crawford, saying basically he'll come up to 147 and knock Terrence Bud Crawford out in 6 rounds. What's your thoughts on that? And I know Bud has openly came out and will not entertain that. He's just like, that's why they got weight classes. That's what they got weight classes for. He's nowhere near me. And even by the time he get up that way, I'll be pretty much gone. But Tank has jumped weight classes before when he fought Barrios at 140. And his power does translate to the next weight class. So even though, and there has been fights in the past where guys have skipped weight classes to fight bigger opponents and have beaten them. Realistically, what chances would you give Tank Davis at 147 if Bud was to somehow, some way, I'm sure if the money was right and he can make the weight to stay at 147 and fight Tank Davis? What chances do you literally give Tank Davis versus Terrence Bud Crawford?
Well, you asked me what chances do I give Tank.
How does that match up, that fight match up?
Yeah. Tank is one of my favorite fighters. He's one of my favorite fighters to watch, and he's one of my favorite fighters. I have him high on my pound-for-pound list.
Correct.
But you asked what chances do I give him? I give him a chance, and that's a puncher's chance. That's it. We know that he, in the lower weight classes, he the only fighter pretty much that I see consistently knocking people out with one punch, or knocking them down just with one punch, not an accumulation of punches.
Right.
And so when a fighter can do that, he is the definition of a puncher's chance. Outside of him getting that punch in, I give him not a shot, right? Because Bud is a good fighter. I know Tank is used to fighting taller fighters. So, and Bud has fought a lot of fighters that is either around close to his height. He don't really, I mean, he had trouble against Gamboa.
Yeah.
Gamboa was undefeated at that time.
He fought him. Yep.
And Terrence even said that was one of his toughest fights.
Absolutely.
And so he was a shorter fighter. So I think that would give him a little problems, but outside of Tank with that one hitter quitter, I don't give him a shot.
So you don't think Tank can play chess with Terrence Crawford in the rings? They both appear in the ring to be guys that set things up for later on in the fight. Tank gets better as the fight go on. so does Terrence Crawford. Tank sets up a lot of his shots, them kill shots later on in the fight due to collecting data. Terrence generally sets up his shots later on in the fight while collecting data. So I'm seeing if that fight was to ever happen, that it'll be a chess match. And yeah, maybe experience will play a part considering what Bud has 40 fights in the pros, and I believe Tank has 27 or 28. But when you break down the science of collecting data and how those two fighters approach the ring or their fights, you just saying Bud is light years ahead of Tank Davis when it comes to that?
No, I'm giving him that advantage because of the weight, right? See,
Okay.
that's the thing. When you are, if Bud was at 135 and he fought Tank at 135, then I would, because Tank is a very crafty fighter. He may not look as slick as Bud does when he's doing what he does, but it's still extremely effective.
Right.
It's still extremely effective because he really does. Tank. I mean, I've seen him get hit. Don't get me wrong. Just like I've seen Bud get hit. So both of them seem to have a chin.
Mm-hmm.
Both of them are very crafty fighters, and they hit you when you in places when you least expect it.
Correct.
And at times when you least expect it. I mean, when Tank fought Rolly Romero thought he was doing something when he had him on the ropes.
Absolutely.
And one punch, the fight was over.
Fight
One,
was over.
it wasn't a combination. It was one punch. The
Yeah.
fight was over.
And it was a punch that he didn't even get to fully let loose. It just hit him on the
Exactly.
button.
Exactly. He did it off the ropes. He said, I'm gonna go ahead and swing this and just duck out the way. And that's what he did. He
Mm-hmm.
swung, expecting him to throw back.
Yeah.
And he was done. So at 135, I think it would be a competitive fight. I think it could go either way.
Mm-hmm.
But if Tank is moving up to 147, I think it'll be a problem. Even though Tank, he probably walk around at 155.
Yeah.
I think it'll be a problem. I think it'll be a problem because that weight, that extra weight, I think it will help Bud absorb some of his Tank's punches. And I think that Bud's power, Tank has never fought nobody with the power of Bud.
Yeah, I agree.
So that's what will be the difference. The weight, I think the weight is more of the difference. And both of them are, I think, supreme fighters, and they're very good boxers. But I think the weight is where the difference at. And
Correct.
that's what will make the difference.
Cool. So like with Charlo, we know he's going to fight Canelo. We already talked about the WBO being stripped, but also Bud knowing that fight, even though it wouldn't be for undisputed, could also do really good when it comes to pay-per-view. Charlo has a nice fan base, and Bud, I'm sure on top of the fan base he already had, he has added a lot more fans. And now he's under the banner, PBC. So they're going to market him. He got a machine behind him now. Mm-hmm. Now, if this fight goes into play, I don't know how fast Charlo can turn around from fighting in September against Canelo. But realistically, let's say if the fight doesn't happen between Earl and Terrence in December, should Bud consider to do what he normally would do, which is fight a tune-up in between the time frame whenever those guys can set up a fight, let's say if it's April or May of next year? Or should to Bud take the time out to basically relax, do what Earl did? I mean, stay working in the gym and stuff like that, but don't take no fight at all to make that fight with Charlo happen. And if so, how do you see that fight panning out between Charlo and Terrence Crawford?
Well, take another fight if you're not retiring. I would say take another fight. if you really seriously think that fight can happen between you or him and Charlo, if he thinks that fight can happen, then I would say take another fight. But that's the thing. The man says he will come back down to 154. Speaking of Jermell Charlo, do you trust his word? I don't know. Right now, Bud can capitalize off of this momentum he has gained by beating Earl Spence.
Correct.
And right now, the position he's in, if he's not retiring, he can go to the bank big.
Big time.
If he fight Keith Thurman, if he fights Ugas, if he fights those fighters, he can go to the bank. If he fights or if he moves up and fights a Tim Tszyu, these people will pay to see these fights, and so he can capitalize off of that. A big fighter like him, you don't want to be waiting around for somebody on their word.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So I think that he should fight regardless of what he thinks that Charlo is actually going to do, because he can capitalize on it. He's been waiting to make the big money fights his whole career. He's made decent money, but now he can make some decent money.
Absolutely. So who would you want to see him if that fight wasn't going to happen or will happen later on in the year? Who would you want to see, other than Earl, obviously, see Terrence Crawford up against? Which fight makes more sense for him
I'm
to have?
in, boy.
Keith Thurman.
My bank account thirsty. You know what I'm saying? So I would want to see him fight Keith Thurman. Keith Thurman is a former unified champion. And so I would want to see him fight one time. And he only lost one time. And that was to a legend in Manny Pac-Man Pacquiao. And so I would like to see how Bud deals with and figures out Keith Thurman. And if he can stop Keith Thurman, wow.
Yeah.
I mean, he already stopped the other top guys that's been top guys for a while in the welterweight division. Keith Thurman, I mean, Ugas, he was never considered a top guy. He just beat Pacquiao, and that really put him on the map like that.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So, but Keith Thurman, this was his division for a while. And so if he can stop Keith Thurman, we know it was Earl Spence's division. Sean Porter was considered the top welterweight. He already stopped two, I would say, of the three top welterweights of the last, 7 or 8 years. He's already stopped two of them. Because I can't right now think of any welterweights that were, top welterweights in the last 6 or 7 years, bigger than Earl Spence, Sean Porter, and Keith Thurman. And so he already stopped two of them. If he can stop Thurman, man.
Yeah, but Terrence got a similar story to like Earl when it comes to Keith Thurman, because when Keith Thurman was that guy and those guys was calling him out, he wouldn't give him a shot. But now, like you said, his bank account thirsty and he thinking, trying to be slick and talk slick and this, that, and the third, because he need to get his butt in the ring he want to make a big payday, obviously. And so Terrence, Bud laughed him out. I seen something of Bud laughing him out, like, you wouldn't even give me a shot, when I was calling you out back then, but now I'm the guy. Now you want me to, give you a shot. And it sounds just like Earl Spence when he said
we go way back. Yeah, cut it out, man. This man talking about we go way back, you my boy, and all this type of stuff. Come on, man. Yeah. He wasn't talking like that when he had the belts.
Yeah, he definitely wasn't talking like that, man. So that's crazy, man. It's kind of interesting. Bud right now holds the key. Obviously, Earl holds the weight when it comes to the rematch, because that's in their clause. So I guess it all is going to depend on the way I'm seeing it, it's no way that I'm not going to see. We're not going to see the rematch. Earl just strikes me as that type of guy. No matter what the circumstance, situations are, no matter how fast the turnaround is, if he is cleared medically, and he may not even have nothing going on medically. It could have just been a bad night in the office. It could have been a lot of things when it comes to
it was a bad
drink.
night in the office.
It definitely was a bad night in the office. That was clear. But if it's if all of that is not the issue, it's no reason why I feel like we won't see the rematch. And don't know how those results would be, but I mess with Bud tough. And I know he's a superior boxer, but I would still ride with Errol Spence in that because that's what I hold ground with, and I gotta stay that way. But Bud's a hell of a fighter.
You gonna put your money where your mouth is?
See, man, the way my bank account's set up, man.
Thirsty.
It's a little thirsty, like Keith Thurman say right now. You know what I mean? But yeah, man. I mean, as crazy it may sound, because like you say, the whole public is going to sway towards Bud. How will Bud deal with? He's always been that guy, but he just haven't been the guy like to the highest degree when it comes to like the whole boxing world just knowing who he is. Boxers, casual fans didn't know who he was, but boxing people knew who he was as a fighter. And now that he is the guy. Bud strikes me as a guy that, is pretty calm and collected and stuff like that. And, seems pretty humble. But I just want to know how he would deal with the pressure now that is all on him as far as him just being the guy. Everybody's gunning for you now. And that first test, again, against a guy that you already beat, do he come out too overconfident because he did what he did? Or do he still have that dog and that hunger like before when he wanted those belts?
That's a good question.
Mm-hmm.
That's a real good question. I don't know. It remains to be seen. I think if he does have that same hunger, I think that the results will eventually be similar. It may, like I said, it may not be as dominant, but I think it'll be similar. That's the thing. Now, he's been undisputed before. He's undisputed again.
Mm-hmm.
And if they have that rematch, they're talking about it at 154, which will be a new weight class.
Mm-hmm.
I think that will help to motivate him, being as though it's a new weight class.
Mm-hmm.
So it will feel like something fresh. It will feel like something new. And I think that will help.
Okay. Yes, sir, man. Yes, sir, man. Well, look, big brother, I definitely appreciate you, man, coming on and joining me live, man, on the Sports Guy TV, where we talk sports like religion, man. And I look forward for future lives that's gonna accumulate, hopefully, a lot of more viewers as the channel continue to grow.
Yes,
and
sir.
I just definitely look forward, man, to the near future, man, and talk boxing and talk sports in general. We got the NFL season coming up soon. Preseason has already got started underway, so look forward to having many, many more sport conversations with your big brother.
Sure.
Yes, sir, man. And I chop it up with you, man. This is Sports Guy TV, where we talk sports like religion.
Yeah.
Share the content, jump in the comments. Let's get it cracking.
That's right.
I'm out. To the next time.